George Isaac has over 40 years of family business, senior executive management, management consulting, and private equity investing experience. As the former CEO of his third-generation family manufacturing, services, and real estate investment businesses, his operating businesses saw six-fold revenue and double-digit earnings growth during his 8 years of leadership. He later served as a board and executive committee member, corporate executive vice president, and divisional CEO of a $1 billion plus public company before transitioning to consulting full-time and overseeing his second and fourth generation family real estate businesses and co-managing his family office and family foundation. Early in his career, George was a partner at Deloitte Consulting. George has served on over 25 boards, including 16 corporate boards, several of which were family businesses. And he has participated on executive, audit, compensation, and investment board committees for companies ranging in size from 30 million US to 1 billion plus businesses. Currently, George advises on family business strategies and management, speaks at national and international conferences, lectures at university family business programs, and writes articles on family enterprise issues for CNBC, Family Business Magazine, Directors and Boards Magazine, Trusts, and Estate Journal, and Wealth Management, among other publications. So folks, I know you've waited for George Isaac to appear. I guess one last point. His family business started in 1899. And I'll end there because George will be able to, I guess, express this clearly in his own words. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome a good friend, my collaborative partner, Mr. George Isaac. Hi, George. Thank you. Great to see you again.
Thanks, Enrique, and thanks to all the attendees for sharing their Saturday morning, Friday night for me in Santa Barbara, California, with us. Though we're excited to chat with you, and hopefully we can answer some questions that are important to you. So please feel free to fire your questions so we can, have some time for that as well. Enrique, I enjoyed your presentation. I think there's one anecdote I want to comment. You kind of finished up on it, but I just want to set the tone to say that, yeah, most family businesses don't make it, but there's no reason why they can't make it. It just takes a fair amount of work. Exactly. If you're really committed to having be a multi-generational family business, you can do it. And we have some roadmaps. There's a lot of flexibility. It depends on your culture and your situations, but it just takes work. And as much work is on the family side as it is on the business side. And that's where I think it breaks down, is on the family side, as Enrique had so many examples of family problems that ruin businesses. So there's hope at the end of the tunnel. You just need to be committed to do the work.
Yes, totally agree, George. Absolutely. There's so much work. Don't think of this as an overwhelming thing. That's what our job is, to make it a little less difficult. But yes, there's daunting work, and there's a lot of things to start with. So let me fire the first shot, George. And this is, as I said, an informal exchange among friends, but a lot of takeaway for the audience today. So I guess the first question, George, that I'd like to share with you and ask you, when were you first introduced to the family business, and what were your family's expectations for you?
I suspect it was on the way back from the hospital when I was born. I wasn't aware of it at that point in time, but we just to set the stage, we grew up in a small village in Ohio, which is the center of the country. And the family business was on the same block as my aunts and uncles and us, my family. So we all lived on the same block. So the family business, the business was really the family. It was really central to our well-being and central to conversations every night when I got older. It was a business conversation with my father. And it was pretty much, I was programmed that, I would be probably the next leader of the family business, because my dad was the leader and he was the youngest of the 9 children in his family. So it was some heavy duty programming. Fortunately, I love business and it worked out fine. But if I wanted to be an artist or something, it probably wouldn't have worked out as well for my personal goals. But it fit well with me, so there's no complaints, and it was a wonderful journey.
So, but it started in 1899, right? At Ohio?
Yeah, that's when my grandfather started things. And, back then it was very small. He was just trying to feed his 9 children and, survive basically during those early years. And then my father, who was in college, the first to go to college, his dad died, and his mother, after his first semester, he had a 4.0, doing really well, wanted to go in the State Department. And his mother, I guess, figured he was the best one to run the company. So she talked him into telling him he had to come back and take over the business. So he took over as the youngster of 9 kids and, ran the business for his generation, did a great job.
Okay. So did you have a formal transition plan as part of your employment with the business?
When I got involved?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the first kind of situation was when I went to college, my father was telling me we should be an engineering undergrad and then get your MBA. It was all programmed, and that was what I wanted to do. Then I was supposed to come back and join the family business. And as you know, Enrique, when I graduated from my MBA program at Michigan, I told my dad I don't want to join the family business. I want to get more experience. So I went to Deloitte. He goes, go there for a couple of years and you'll come back and join the business. Well, that wasn't the case. So it took quite a while before I entered the scene. And before I did it, I was a partner at Deloitte at this point in time. We'd already hired an outside president. So we had that experience of bringing in an outsider because we didn't have family. Part of the problem was a lot of entrepreneurs. They're very good. They're very strong. There can be sometimes authoritarian, and they don't always develop a good team around them. And so the people that were left with my dad's organization, he didn't feel were capable of running the business. And so they had asked me to come back, and I didn't want to go back at that point in time. So we hired an outside president, non-family member, to run the company. That didn't go well. And so that's when I decided to come back. But before I did, I was very careful in having a shareholder operating agreement that you just mentioned, and an employment agreement. And it was a big effort. I mean, we went through kind of the initial phases of this 9-step process. I didn't know it was a 9-step process at the time. It kind of got developed afterwards with my personal experiences and work in consulting. But the goal was to get the family members aligned. And I can't overemphasize the importance of having alignment. And even though our fathers and aunts and uncles had their wishes, at the first meeting when I got together with my 8 cousins, it was 6 cousins, my brother and myself, from 3 different family branches. I said, the first decision we have to make is, do we want to keep this business or do we want to sell it?
True.
I know our dads and aunts and uncles want us to keep it, but it's up to us now. And so we started at a very elementary level and worked on, do we want to keep it or not? And then we kind of decided and worked through, who should own the stock? And it had to work through, who's going to be involved. And once we figured that out, and we kind of sorted with, there was 8 of us, 5 of us are going to be owners, principally because we were going to be involved. The other 3 were not going to be. And we didn't want to basically have the responsibility of managing their wealth from their inheritance from their parents. Things could go well or they could not go so well. It happened to go well, but we didn't want to be responsible for them. So we ended up buying them out at a fair valuation. And then we sat down with their owners and said, okay, what do we want to do? And what's their thoughts on growth, on cash distributions, on risk, and work through some very, meaty issues in terms of how we're going to operate. What powers would I have as a CEO? What would the board do? Who would be on the board? How would it be elected? And all those kinds of very, nitty-gritty nuances. We spent a lot of time on several meetings before I was willing to basically resign from my partnership at Deloitte, which was a big decision for me. And so that was a very thorough process with attorneys and so on.
How difficult was it, navigating through cousins and uncles and there's a lot of emotion there, right? It's not theoretically it's so easy to look at it from a perspective from an outsider, but you were obviously an insider.
Yeah, I was an insider and an outsider. I mean, I wasn't working there, and they all wanted me to come back and lead the business. So I had a kind of receptive audience, and so we just kind of talked through what was important, and we came up with the rules. What are the rules if someone's going to get fired, or how are we going to do compensation? And we kind of worked through all the nitty gritty things where there could be conflict, and we had good alignment. And we actually redistributed stock so we could each all be 20% owners. So it was very constructive at that point, and we were all well aligned, and that was important to me, and then I think to everybody. But that's what we did.
Okay, let me go to the hard part, George. I'm gonna share with them the slide, but this is my first question on related to your book. Your book talks about your 5 C's for successful family dynamics. Let me probably illustrate this in a clearer. There you go. Here. So George, this talks highly about the 5 C's. Can you explain this? How did you balance the focus between family and business? Any lessons here? Any mistakes? Because in Asia, mostly in Asia, this is tough. This is a very sensitive issue.
Well, you're absolutely right, and it's tough everywhere. It was tough for us, and I look at it as almost a teeter-totter. And sometimes you got to focus more on the family. Sometimes you have to focus more on the business, and depending upon the situation, you need to spend time. Whatever it requires to get things proper. Mm-hmm. In my situation, I focused on the business because the business was static. It hadn't been growing. It was successful and no debt and cash on the books, there was another companies called in real estate, which is my father's true passion. So he was focusing on doing shopping centers and real estate, while the metals manufacturing business wasn't as as keen to him as
real estate.
Yeah, and so that was part of the issue. So the business, when we got involved, we basically tore the business apart and put it back together. We challenged everything that was being done. We brought in a new management team, significantly new. They certainly kept the family members, but with new managers to determine what we really needed once we come up with our strategic plan. So it was a focus heavily on the business. The family side, we did reasonably well. We had retreats every year, but I think it was something that I could have done a better job with, candidly, in terms of working with the family members. The 5 C's kind of came out of experience in terms of what's important and what I learned from my family business experience and working with other clients. Consideration is at the top of the C's there, and everybody growing up. Let me back up. Growing up in a family business, I heard my cousins talk about their dad's business, and every one of them looked at it like it was dad's business. Mm-hmm. So with that understanding, they all had strong connections and ownership, and so we need to be considerate of what their needs were and what was important to them. And so we did a really good job at the front end of getting ourselves aligned and knowing what each person was important to them. And we agreed we weren't going to do distributions other than for taxes, so we can keep it capital in the business and grow it. And we're all on board. Well, those needs, as you know, over time will change. And so we ended up I didn't end up going back and talking to them to see, are we still aligned? And so over time, the need for distributions and liquidity and those kinds of things became surface. So that was a lesson that I learned, was once you have yourself aligned with your shareholder group, you need to continuously check back to be certain that you're still aligned, because things change. They get older, they have problems, or they have wants or desires and they want to see
True.
realized. Communication was another thing that we did a good job on, principally because the shareholders were insiders. So we had, good communication with them. But that's when you have outside shareholders, communicating with them is very important, so they understand and feel they're being, respected, and there's some transparency in what the issues are that you're working on, and so there's a better understanding of why some decisions are being made. Connection is the other C, and people need to feel connected to their family enterprise, regardless of whether they're a school teacher, a totally different career path, or just an owner, or whether they're working in the business. It's still a big part of it's got their name on the door, it's their dad's, legacy. And so we always invited them to outings and special events when we had annual cookouts or holiday parties or retirement parties. We invited everybody that was associated with the family to those events. Compensation is always an issue, and there's always an issue in terms of rewards for employment versus rewards for ownership, and balancing those needs in terms of dividends to the owners versus compensation. We took a very objective approach and had an outside firm benchmark market values compensation levels for everybody, and use that as a framework to pay market rates in terms of base salary and incentive. My compensation was agreed upon in my employment contract in terms of my base salary, and my bonus was based upon beating a certain return on equity. So that was all mechanical. So it didn't get into, family dynamics in terms of what should so-and-so get paid. We also had an outside board, which we can talk about a little bit later, which is involved with the compensation. And then the last thing was conflict resolution. And how do we handle conflict when we had it? And that was a process that we stumbled around a little bit. And the book's got some real specifics in terms of a process to develop and handling conflict resolution that I could refer you to. But we didn't have a lot of conflict, but we had some changing goals, and that created some disparity in terms of where we were going.
So pretty much, is it because you came from a professional outfit and your cousins respected you, and you were from the outside trying to make the alignment happen inside? It made a bit of difference. Was that a major consideration?
Yes, let's be honest, I spent 11 years management consulting before I came back. So, I kind of was a consultant, and I used my consulting skills, which was my main skill set at the time to begin with, and, worked through the discussions and facilitated my own transition, and the generational transition. We decided, well, in fact, my cousins were the ones that insisted that I report to the board, not to my father, so that we, not have to do things the old way. And he had a much different style of managing than I did, which was fine, and it worked for him. But I'm not him, and the times were different, so I needed to develop my own culture. And that was a lot of what I initially did, was change the culture in the company to move from authoritarian to empowerment and accountability.
So in Asia, it's from emperor to engagement.
Precisely, engagement at actually all levels. Starting with the senior management team, but over the first couple of years, we worked our way all the way down to the factory workers, where we set goals and standards of performance. And I can tell you a story. It's one that there's two stories that I think were really significant, or good ideas that I learned from others. One was, I went to a seminar and they talked about making people feel important and just giving them business cards. Certain people have business cards, right? But not everybody. And so we have truck drivers that are going out, and office people that that don't get outside the office. And so I decided, well, I'll order business cards for everybody. And so the truck drivers, they weren't called truck drivers, they were called customer service reps, because they were the first people to go out and get our raw materials from industrial plants.
Correct.
And so they got a box of cards. So, I thought, seems like a good idea. So we did it. 6 months later, one of our older long-term employees passed away. So I went to the funeral and I saw the wife. As I walked into the funeral home and the casket was there, And there's a nice board with the pictures. They put pictures around the board. Right in the middle of that bulletin board
Calling card.
was his card. And I got goosebumps, and I'm like, oh my God. And the wife said, George, you can't believe how much that meant when he got his business card. And I thought, what a simple thing to show respect and, you know, and care and empathy to, you know, your fellow team member. And I was like flabbergasted, and of course, I somewhat felt foolish for never having done it before. But so that was one example of kind of a, you know, bringing people into the fold. The other was at our plant, we had 3 plants making the same kind of products. And one plant was bigger and more complex, and their numbers were not as good in terms of cost per unit. And I talked to the plant manager, and he said, "Oh, our plant is much more complex than those other guys. You know, it costs us more." And I didn't buy that, and so I said, "Let's have a meeting." So we came out to the plant and had a meeting with, you know, the vice president of production, the director, and the plant manager. And we're sitting down talking about the production issues. And I said, "Well, where's the operator, the press operator?" Well, he's out running a press. I said, "Well, who knows more about running this press than the guy that's there 8 hours a day doing it? Go get him." So they go out and they bring the guy off and put somebody else on the press, and the guy comes in, and here's the president wants to see, you know, his input. And he came up, he gave us great ideas. I mean, ideas that were like, I can't believe we're doing that, you know. And we ended up doubling the production with no capital expenditure. And this guy had set goals for the manufacturing line. He got shift reports so he could see how he was doing. He was beating his numbers. All of a sudden, he had pride in what he was doing. He felt really good about his work and much more energy. So those are some of the, you know, the lessons that I learned in terms of, you know, the caring and connection and communication with everybody.
Okay, thank you, George. I think this framework provides a perspective for family members to seriously explore. I want to go to the second question. Your 2 businesses were 100 years old. You kept one for Gen 4 and Gen 5, and you sold one for Gen 3. What were the reasons for selling one and retaining one?
Well, we wanted a multi-generational family business. You know, we're all wanted for the future of the family and future generations. We want to have a business. The manufacturing business was sold basically because the shareholders, the 5 of us, or it wasn't some of the 5, wanted to have some liquidity, and there was happened to be a consolidation in our industry at the time. So we were able to get a very attractive price. And that's why we did it. And part of the problem was because we never did any dividends. So I would prepare reports to the board as showing the value of the company, the stock's going up, you know, very well each year, and these nice fancy charts. But one of my cousins came in and said, "We have all this wealth that's being created, but I don't see any of it. And it's kind of like a diamond. And I have this diamond that grows in value. And then I die and I pay estate taxes and I give the diamond to my kids, and he holds the diamond, it grows, he pays taxes, but there's no value, there's no use, there's no realization of the wealth." And so I think where we failed, and I'll take the criticism, is that we should have been doing some dividends so people could realize some of the rewards that were being generated. And we'll talk a little bit later, I think, about the family wealth evaporation trap. There's some reasons from an asset protection and diversification and risk management perspective to be getting not everything be trapped in your family business in terms of your net worth. So, you know, it was basically their needs changed, and we never did distributions. And so this was a way to take advantage of providing liquidity and realization of the wealth that was created over the 8 years to our shareholders.
So the objective, you had to manage those assets, and collectively the family had to decide with your leadership to let go of one particular company.
Yeah, it was agreement with among all 5 of them, and actually our board, we had a 9-person board, and they approved it as well. So it was, it was a collegial effort, and it was a reward for the hard work that happened and the good fortune and luck that we had over the 8 years. And then it gave me an opportunity. I mean, that's not why I did it, but I went with the public company then and learned all about, capital markets and public companies and consolidations of industries and those kinds of things. So it expanded my business acumen. And I learned some things in there and in my private equity investing that helped me write some of the chapters in the book, the latter chapters that most people in the family business world, and as well as myself when I was running our family business, was not aware of and wasn't thinking about. And so it really helped me in my family business consulting.
Mhm. I'd like to share you another slide, George. You probably would like to help the audience understand this
Okay.
this framework, which is very, very appropriate for Asian families.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think there's three parts to conflict management. Prevention, what can we do to prevent conflict? Number two is detection, have an early detection system so you can nip things in the bud. These problems, as you know, Enrique, they don't go away. If you ignore them or kind of partially deal with them, they go away for a while, but they're just underneath the skin. And some trigger event down the road is going to make it pop back up, usually more fierce than the first time around. So you really want to have a good detection systems. Then resolution, how do you resolve it? Prevention, a lot of prevention, and what I think we were successful in is having this detailed operating agreement and employment agreements and really clear on what authorization levels the board had, what I had, how we're going to operate, what our goals were, what our plans were for dividends, risk, and so on. And so we got real good alignment. The family council and constitution, we didn't have to deal with that because it was only 5 of us and we were involved in the business. So we kind of had a family council meeting every time we had a board meeting or we had an annual retreat as well. And so we did that kind of collaboratively with the board. Once you get more shareholders, and particularly shareholders who are not involved in the business, that's very, very important to formalize. Detection is really coming up with the communication systems to see how things are going, and it could be as simple as going out and having lunch with somebody and saying, how's it going? Are we meeting your needs? Or you think we're running the company properly? And how do you feel about your role in it? And we did some, but not enough of that. I mean, that was something that, in hindsight, I was so business focused on growing the business and meeting the kind of the shareholder goals that I think some of the family management aspects should have been weighted a little bit more. And so that's a lesson learned. And that's just, that's just a judgment call in terms of how you balance family matters versus business matters. Certainly we had, access to me. Anybody could come in and talk to me. And so that was, I was very accessible. And that's another way for detection. Then a resolution, if you had a problem, it's typically a series of steps. The first one is a one-on-one conversation with somebody. And then it might be a one-on-one with the CEO or a fellow shareholder or a board member. You got to kind of pick the right mix of depending upon what the problem is. And if that doesn't get resolved, it gets progressively more expensive and more difficult. You can do internal mediation. If that doesn't work, then you get external professional mediation, and you better get it resolved then, because if you go into litigation and arbitration, it's very expensive, and it's quite often it's not a good solution. It's usually a winner and a loser, and what you really want is a win-win.
Nobody wins. Yeah, very true.
So, that's kind of how we recommend this whole conflict avoidance and resolution to have these 3 steps. But the very first one is getting the right foundation. Enrique, I used to think that my goal is to get everybody in the family in the business, and now my goal is to get everybody that wants to be in the family, that fits and aligns with it, aligns together with everybody in the business. The people that don't align, they could, meet their goals. We need to meet the individual's goals and the group business goals, and sometimes those are not overlapping. I had a client that has 95% of his net worth in a real estate company. He owns 5% of the real estate company.
Mhm.
He needs dividends to live on. Well, the majority owners, the family members that own the real estate company don't want to do distributions. They want to keep building real estate projects. So here he is stuck, trapped, if you will, in this family business, no liquidity. He can't like go to the stock market and sell a stock.
Correct.
And so he's stuck there, doesn't have enough cash to live on, has no power, no authority because he only owns 5%. He's not, can't get a board seat. That's a misfit. You know, he should have a diversified portfolio. And, you know, and so had they done a different, better job perhaps of estate planning and aligning what the goals are of that generation's needs to what they can offer. A typical example is you have an operating company and there's real estate and there's a manufacturing business. Maybe you separate those two into two different entities, two corporations, and the family members that want cash flow and low risk, they own the real estate. The operating company leases the real estate, the plant and warehouse from the real estate company. And the other people own the operating company, which has more risk and more upside. So you can get things more aligned. So there's a lot to be said about this whole alignment thing that you know you talked about and I'm talking about as well.
I just want to follow up this question on number 2, in detection. Informal communications, was it difficult for you as a family member and a shareholder to align with the shareholder cousins that are not active in the business? If it didn't happen to your family, what would be your advice to the audience now, where some of the family members may not be really active and just wait for dividends every year?
Yeah,
They have a totally different mindset, right?
They can, and I think it's that requires negotiation and discussion. I mean, in fairness, so many people say, well, the people that are working here should call the shots, but that's not necessarily true. The shareholders call the shots.
Exactly.
The owners, right? Now, and you can say, well, majority rules. Well, majority can rule, but if you have minority problems, they become majority problems. I mean, they have problems. So it really requires thoughtful consideration and discussion and usually some middle of the road where you have a dividend policy. And the other side of that is, Enrique, is if the outside shareholders, the non-working member shareholders, have a seat on the board or representation or have some knowledge of what the issues are, when there's a time where you don't want to do a dividend because you have this great business opportunity, they'll understand. But if they're out in the dark, don't know what's going on, and all they do is get a check, they look at the inside people as somebody between them and the money. And it's not it's not a good situation. So it's really transparency and bringing people along that really makes the difference. Make sense?
Makes sense, absolutely. Keeps us from, firefighting families that are always in conflict, because like what you said, the problem doesn't go away. It's just there. It's waiting to implode again with a vengeance. So in your case, you just had to dive into it and make the alignment, no matter how difficult. I think very clear with all the transparencies that you just mentioned.
Yes, and I think the nuance or the key point I like to make is that it wasn't dictated by our parents. I mean, you can say, daddy can say whatever he wants to, and while he's around, that goes, right? He rules the roost. But if you don't have true alignment amongst your generation, it's gonna bubble up. And so even with the best laid plans, you need to be certain there's some good communications, transparency, some buy-in, so people understand it's a fair deal and it's appropriate. I mean, it's not like everybody gets to vote, but you really need to spend some time trying to build alignment and support for it. And that's really hard for the prior generation because they're used to calling the shots and people, follow. And so this whole discussion and inclusiveness is very important in my mind from what I've seen.
Yep. Otherwise, it's just going to bubble up. I'd like to move to another item, George. You devoted a couple of chapters in your book on multi-generational wealth management and avoiding the family wealth evaporation trap. Would you be able to, let us know why you included these chapters in your book? I have a slide here. You mentioned about the family headwinds, no? Wealth preservation headwinds. And you also highlighted this part, the fist can knock out multi-generational family wealth. Great picture. Can you share something about this to our audience?
Yeah, and the reason you asked me why did I write it, why did I include it in the book is because nobody writes about this. Nobody thinks about this. It's one of those aha moments that I discovered after I left our family business. I didn't run our family business the way this suggests. Was learning afterwards of my private equity experience in the capital markets in the public sector, public company, that I realized this is something that too many family businesses think they're doing a good job of being stewards of their wealth, but they're actually allowing a lot of wealth evaporation. I think we may do a webinar on this at another point in time. Just really requires some more depth, discussion. But let me briefly say is that there are 4 headwinds, and I called it fists in terms of perpetuating multi-generational wealth. And these are not brilliant. I mean, they're pretty obvious factors, but in the book, you'll see when I put the numbers on a model and show the examples, that's what's revealing is how big of an impact it has in terms of perpetuating wealth. And family would be the number of family members. If each, dad has 2 kids and dad and mom have 2 kids and they have 2 kids, all of a sudden you have 2 generations involved in the business. We're all living longer. You could go have a lot more mouths to be feeding from the family. So you really better be growing the business, you're growing the wealth, or it's going to be a significant reduction in per capita income and wealth for the individual family members. If all of a sudden you have 8 family members as opposed to 1 or 2, that's a huge dilution. Inflation is the other. I call it the silent killer. I mean, just think about your investment reports from your investment bankers. If you have a Goldman Sachs or Merrill Lynch or an account, they never put inflation adjustment on their return. It's hard to even find their returns, but when they do it, it's they don't have inflation. If inflation is 2.5%, 3%. That's a big number, and so we have to look at that. And then spending, what's your spending? How much are you spending? And most people need to look at spending as a percentage of their assets. So if you're spending 3% of your assets, and inflation is 3% to make the math easy. And taxes quite often around 3%, at least there in the US, and that's ignoring the state taxes. You have 9% right there,
By default.
And then what are you going to make? How much are you going to make? And then when you got the family growing from 1 or 2 to 8, it's a real eye opener in terms of how do you perpetuate wealth.
Exactly, yeah.
You need to have a culture of growth if you're going to be a good steward of the family's wealth. You really need to grow that wealth, not just maintain it. And that kind of was, a take-home point that you want to have future entrepreneurs being groomed and so on to continue the legacy.
It's 12 o'clock.
So, wow. So that's easily around, if you're, close to 10% by default, do nothing, your wealth is being eroded on an annualized basis. That's about it.
Yeah, a little bit each year, and then if you do it over a generation, I mean, it's a real big deal.
Wow. So, with the office highlighted a lot of things here. This is in your book.
Yeah, selling the family business. I can comment on that. I mean, the book covers that. There's 2 pieces to that. There's really the emotional, personal piece, because if you don't have your family business anymore, it's kind of a loss of identity, a loss of place to go each day. Allows the, right now allows the older generation, at least they can go to the office and hang out and, and mix with some people. If you don't have your family business, you may not be invited on boards like you used to be, and so on. So it's a real sense of identity and self-worth that you lose when you don't have a family business. The other side is, of course, when you sell it and you pay in this country a capital gain tax on the
Same
on the
here.
gain.
Yeah,
And
huge.
if you sell for 50 million and you have around a third of it goes out in taxes, you got, and then you have to reinvest. You have less money to reinvest in lower producing returns because your business is hopefully selling at 6-7 times EBITDA, and so you might be getting a much better return on your business as a percentage of the value.
So you're
And then
selling
you
it.
now have less money, and you're going to get a whatever. I mean, it's public markets 9, 10, 7, 8%. It's stuff where you're going to be making 20, 25% return on your assets. So there's a real negative leverage in terms of loss of wealth. Now, if the business should be sold because it's a dying business, you don't have, it's not a good outlook, fine. But just to sell it to provide liquidity, that's where I get into the family wealth evaporation trap. And there's another way to provide liquidity, diversification, and asset protection through this family wealth evaporation trap work that I've done.
Hmm. Wow. So that's an eye opener for, I think, the audience. Nobody probably even advised them. Their bankers probably never raised the issue that, if you sell your business, you take out immediately 1/3 by way of all these tax instruments, right? So
it's a surprise. I mean, and then when you reinvest it and you get an 8% return as opposed to 20% return on your operating company, and you lose your perks, you lose your salary, you lose your football tickets to the game or whatever. I mean, there's a big change in that.
So just this one briefly here, George. How do you explain to the audience manage a family as an investment asset?
Okay, well, when I go out to a lot of my clients, I'll say, how diversified is your family wealth? Because everybody wants to talk about family business, but that's a chunk of your family's wealth. And they'll show me a nice portfolio with so much stock, so much bonds, and so on. They can do a pie chart. Let's just say, for example, it's worth $25 million. And I'll say, well, what about your family business? Oh, that's not our investments. That's our operating company. So, okay, well, what do you think that's worth? Oh, that's probably worth 75 million. So, okay, so let's put that in a pie chart. So now you have 75% of your family's wealth in an illiquid, concentrated asset class that has a tremendous amount of risk that I'm not sure you're getting paid for. Because when I look at your business, you have no debt and you have $30 million in cash. Well, yeah, we're a conservative business. We're very financially conservative. Grandpa says he doesn't like debt, so we don't have any debt. So, well, you have $25 million in receivables and inventory. Do you think you could finance those? Oh, yeah. Working capital line, sure. What do you think you could have to pay for interest? Oh, maybe 3.5%. Okay, so you're taking your family's precious equity capital and investing in a 3% returning asset, your receivables and inventory. Now, if you look at that over a generation, how much wealth is being lost? Or the $30 million you have in cash sitting on your balance sheet that's been there forever as a reserve, and it's earning peanuts. What is that costing you over a generation? And it's when you run those numbers, they're huge numbers. And the irony is that these losses are not recorded; they're not measured.
Exactly.
It's not on your income statement that lost. And so this whole respect for capital is something that I really feel strongly about, and that you need to treat capital with great respect. You want to get it diversified. You want to be certain that you have a reasonable capital structure in your bank and your company where there's some level of debt. I'm very conservative financially, so I'm not talking about big time leverage of debt, but there's a lot of opportunity for a lot of businesses I go into where they're really losing wealth, unmeasured, unrecognized, unreported wealth, and don't know it. So that's why I wrote it in the book, because it's kind of a unique concept that most I have not seen written about.
And business owners are obviously ignorant of this erosion of wealth. by simply not doing anything. So that's the, I guess, the rational way you said it's an investment, not necessarily an operating asset. You can combine both, but think of it as an investment.
Yeah, I asked them, are you in the family business or the family wealth management business? You know, and I think you're in the family wealth management business, and your family business is one of your big engines that generates wealth. You know, but
Yeah.
I mean, same thing. If you look at your shareholders, like they're my cousins, you know, they're lucky they got the stock. That's not good. You should look at them as investors and treat them as investors. And
As
so
investors.
there's a whole lot around this whole family wealth evaporation, and you know how you look at the
Yeah.
world.
Okay. Of course, lastly, this part, you simply advise them to make sure you treat it as an investment, really.
Yeah, and one thing that I don't, do we have questions? I mean, one thing is what do you do if your son or daughter wants to be a high school English teacher or history teacher or something? You know, and how do you use your wealth? I mean, there's a lot of good questions. No necessarily right or wrong answers, but you know, part of it is do you want, I mean, you want your children to realize their dreams and be productive. And I had a client where there were 3 boys in the business. The one boy hated the business. As a result, did a poor job. The only reason he's there is because his dad pays him a lot of money. His dad's like, I got all my boys in the business. This is great. And I'm like, no, your son is miserable. And he's not doing a good job to begin with. So, you know, there's some multiple perspectives. I mean, all of us have the vision that it's for the future generations. We want our family members to work in the business and live happily ever after.
Okay. Interesting. So don't worry, George. I think the audience wants more of your wisdom here. So this is what you said: avoiding the family business wealth evaporation trap. And you mentioned this misalignment, the focus on how it operates without perceiving it to be an actual investment. And you mentioned this as well: wealth creation, realization, and preservation. Can you just elaborate on this a bit?
Yeah, we're pretty good at business guys, you know, in general, family business, they're pretty good at creating wealth. You know, they work hard and they make their business grow and so on. But they don't, and a lot of us, and I produce reports showing our returns on equity to my board, and they look really good, right? And my bonus was based upon that, so it was nice. But the returns on equity to the shareholders were zero. They never left the company. So you must remember, be cognizant that realization of the wealth is important. And for the financial types on the call, you know that if you have 10 years of no return, and then you have a big return 10 years from now, that's much smaller return on investment than if you had regular recurring returns, because of the time value of money. So realization of wealth is an important part of our jobs. And so it also keeps the family a lot happier if they're starting to realize some of the wealth and not just seeing it, but can't get it. And then preservation is, you know, top-notch estate planning, taxation planning, critical. You can save more money quite often in doing proper estate planning than you can in a couple of years worth of operating results. At least in this country, the taxes are very, very aggressive for higher net worth people in terms of estate transfers. So that's what we're talking about. There's 3 phases, and you need to be cognizant of dealing with each phase.
Okay. Thank you for that, George. There are many questions coming in, but I'd like to zero in first on, I guess, my final question before we start entertaining their questions. Is that okay?
Sure.
All right. So let me just swing to the other slide because this is very important. Here. These last two slides will probably be at best explained by you.
Going to surprise me again with some slides?
Yeah. So there.
We talked about this. I mean, I think, this is the example that I mentioned.
Yes.
Where
Yes.
the first pie chart on the left is, what they tell me their diversification is. They're very proud of a diversified portfolio. And I show them, well, it's not quite as diversified as you think it can be. And over time, you can change that family business pie without hurting the family business, continuing to grow it by just doing some distributions over time into other entities, or you can distribute them to the shareholders. You can have opt-in options for who wants to invest in this real estate project. There's a lot of ways, and we talk about that. And then the metrics, I think I mentioned a couple of those. You're an operating entity or an investment asset, and where's your focus? And the answer is a little bit of both. Too many of them are leaning on the operating entity solely, and what part of the goal is to move them to the center where you're looking at returns on equity, focus on capital management and risk management, i.e. having all your eggs in one basket. So I think that's we pretty well covered this in the essence of time.
I guess I will dovetail on what you said. Most of those family-owned businesses will always say, but we don't have time. We are 24/7 running this business. All we have are traditional investments, mostly with the banks. And how do we go about this, converting this operating entity into investment asset? So I think my take there, before I pass this on to George, is that's the purpose why you need to set up a family office. And the family office will most likely initiate this, assign a family member whose passion would be to work on this transformation, right? But what's your take on that, George?
Yeah, it depends on the net worth, whether you want to have a family office or you want to have an outside, use a multifamily office or just an outside investment advisors. But it is, I think business, the recession in 2008, the most recent pandemic, I think that things are not as stable as they were years ago. And so having some diversification and asset protection, I think is an important part of the risk management of your family's wealth. So my position is, in most cases, that you can distribute a certain amount of income or each year out of the family business into diversified investments and not handicap the business. I'm not talking about chopping up the business by any means or over leveraging the business, but the businesses that I see are so poorly managed from the capital perspective that there's a lot of opportunity. And I'd be glad to talk about that with examples at another time. But
yep.
It requires some rigorous analysis in terms of what the business needs, the volatility of the earnings, those kinds of things, and trying to understand what the family needs and so on. But it's a comprehensive planning project, but it's well worth it, and you can fix anything over a 5 to 7 year period, pretty much.
This is what you're doing now for your clients in North America. Hand-holding them.
Yeah, I did one recently, and it had an extremely conservative board of directors. And we ended up convincing them to basically do what I just said about borrowing a line of credit, working capital line for the receivables and inventory. They had a bunch of cash, and we ended up, as I think, distributing $100 million in cash out of the business without harming the business's outlook at all, and creating multiple investment entities for the family so that they had, no matter what happens to the business, the family wealth, they still got $100 million. That's not subject to something terrible happening to their industry or the business.
Okay. All right. So thank you, George. I guess this is the final question before we dive into the Q&A. It's good. The number of questions are growing. After years of working in and consulting with family businesses, do you have a vision of an ideal family enterprise that perpetuates a family legacy for for multiple generations. We got some slides prepared, and essentially this is, I think this is a very important issue for all those that have attended today. How do they perpetuate their legacy?
Okay, but this is kind of falling a little bit along the line that we're just talking about with the family wealth evaporation trap, by moving some of the trapped net worth, excessive net worth in your family business into other entities. So part of the I think the art of family business is getting places for people to be connected and engaged. Not everybody's belongs in the family business, right?
Yes.
So, we need the right people in the family business, but we don't want to exclude or not have opportunities for everybody to participate at different levels. So in the upper right-hand corner, the orange family business chart, that's where you put the active stakeholders. They could be on the board, some outside advisors, fiduciary directors to govern the family business. Then diversified investments, that could be a stock and bond portfolio, and you could have other family members that that have the interest in being involved in overseeing their family's investments with an outside advisor, a professional, whether it's a family office or an investment advisor. That would give them a hook into the business. Sometimes the family bank works out where you can have funding for entrepreneurial startups within the family for the next generation. They got an idea, they got to write up a business plan. You're like a real bank, in terms of they need to, justify their position and so on.
Family invest in it.
Yeah, and they can start up a little business that hopefully will grow. And that could be other place for family members to be on the board. Special purpose investment entities, that's where, like, let's say you want to invest in biotechnology and you have a son-in-law or son that's a doctor.
Oh, yeah.
That might be a really good spot for that person to be on that board. So, in other real estate, you can have various different entities for outside investments that you are feeding. And you can have family members that have niche skill sets participate in that. Then my favorite one is the family foundation. And that's, my little example, I put it down as that's where grandpa and the grandkids are on that board, and the grandfather the grandmother, if it's the matriarch, gets to share with that 2 generations down, the family's values, their thoughts on philanthropy, investments, risk and helping others, the kind of the core values of the family in terms of that, as well as stewardship in terms of the assets. That's a great teaching opportunity for the next generation, the younger kids, to participate. So then you have a place almost to connect everybody in the family as you define family, whether it's in-laws or just direct descendants. And it's a great way to perpetuate your legacy in a multifaceted way. And that to me is the ideal end game.
Okay. So thank you, George. I think this gives them a good perspective of how to really grow the business without necessarily stretching the business. How to really grow the business and still reconcile with family members that may not necessarily be active in operating the business. We talk about this. I also had one client that totally did not like the dirty business of their founders and went into a new business like technology, and they were accommodated and they reconciled and there was alignment and it started to make money. And in the end, the family was united and the family bank or the family fund was able to provide equity when it was needed. So this allows a glimpse of family members to really appreciate the value of what you wrote in your book. So I'm going to start with some questions here, George, if you don't mind. Let me start with this question. Any advice on formulating a fair delineation of responsibilities between owners, siblings, so as not to create new businesses? This is what I raised earlier. Sometimes to avoid conflict, they put up another business just to accommodate and manage a potential conflict in the works. So what's the advice on creating a fair delineation of responsibilities without necessarily creating a new business?
Well, there's divisions that each person could run. There's if that's what the question is, how do you provide responsibilities? There's you need a board of directors in my mind to really have independence. I mean, it's hard for a brother to decide what the other brother should be doing, and while dad can do it. Now, when dad's gone, it may not last. So there's usually multiple spots where people can have enriched jobs that satisfy their needs to a certain extent. I don't know what's wrong with creating another division or creating a business if it's owned, everybody owns it, and I mean there's nothing wrong with that. But
the founder would stretch his luck by setting up a business just to separate siblings from intramurals.
Yeah, there's no, I guess, black and white answer, but I believe that creating challenging work for each person that matches their skill sets, and it's determined by an outside board of directors that picks the right candidate.
True.
Is probably the best answer, and it'll be the best financial answer for everybody that's an owner. But if both guys want to be president, is that what you're kind of talking about? How do you?
Maybe there's a power struggle somewhere, and to buy peace, the founder would separate and would set up a new business.
Well, I mean, I don't think that's bad as long as there's no conflicts of interest. I mean, that's what your example did in India. They created two different line up a business, and one guy couldn't run it, but the other guy ran it real well. And so
I think that's correct. An independent board would be good enough, but to also deter a potential looming power issue, very strict entry rules.
Very strict what?
Very strict entry and exit rules. So a family member who joins the business must follow certain protocol, qualifications, standards. These are rules that a family member must sign. In my experience, in one client in Singapore, we made the children sign an employment contract. We made them realize that, hey, during office hours, you don't think about yourselves as owners. You think of yourselves as professionals, as workers, and you have sets of KPIs that if you screw this department, be ready to go. There is no exception here. No two sets of employees. And they realize it because at first, wow, this business is my dad's. But yes, I know, but you are just a child and therefore you don't have experience. So when you enter, you follow the same set of rules as non-family members. And reluctantly, they end up signing. And so far, so good.
That's good. I think sometimes you need an outside family business consultant to help train people what your role is as an owner, as a manager, as a family member, and not get those roles confused, because it's very easy, as you mentioned, I think earlier in your remarks, you confuse those roles. You have the three bubbles, circles, the circle diagram, and when you come in, you're wearing a certain hat, and your owner hat's for, and your board hat is good for about 4 days a year, 3 or 4 meetings. Your employment management hat's good for most of the time, and so you really need to help articulate and define the roles because people get confused.
And if I may illustrate here, typical in a family business, in the circle, the biggest circle is actually family, which poses a lot of problem for many. Because when a family member does not perform, performance metrics is thrown out of the window. They look the other way.
Yeah, that's not the worst thing that can happen. I mean, I've seen that happen. And it's, it's for family harmony and not offending anybody. There's no accountability. The business suffers.
Exactly.
And in the end, and Enrique, as I think you would agree, you may have saved family harmony for a while, but as the business gets worse and worse, the family harmony is going to get a lot worse.
Absolutely.
It
Yeah.
doesn't work out. I mean, it does
Yes.
not work out when the business goes down the drain. There's a lot of people that are very unhappy.
Absolutely. We've been through many of this, George, and sadly, when the father wants to impose sanctions, then the other half, the wife, would say, "Don't be too hard on your son."
No, there's
So
the one project I actually said I can't help you anymore on is when the son was not a good guy and wanted to throw his father out. And I said, you need to have an employment agreement. And the mother goes, we don't need an employment agreement for your son. I'm like, well, I can't really help you there.
Exactly. One of my, I guess, best experience was a few years ago when the son, who was always absent, he was into, a lot of vices. The family council, which we set up, said he has to go. And the father said, hey, there's an agreement. We have to do it. But Professor, can you do it for us? I said, hey, I'm here to provide you the structure, but in enforcing it, it has to be the family. And the founder said, well, I would love to, but maybe you should talk to my wife.
Yeah.
And before our phone ended, the wife grabbed the phone from the husband and he said, spare my son. And I had to put the wife down. I had to tell the wife. And the wife was crying because she knew that, the son would be axed. And the wife told me, spare my son. I said, that's a problem with you, madam. You're a CEO. And she said, no, I'm not a CEO. I'm just a treasurer. I said, you're a chief emotion officer. And she couldn't answer. So this is really the tug of war for many families. And for me, it has to stop. Like what you said, the bubble is there. It's just waiting to go up again in the surface when the founder is no longer around. So, you may have harmonized it for a few weeks, but any trigger can again cause another very huge problem, especially when the founder is no longer around. Which connects me, George, to another question here. There's a question here from the viewpoint of parents. The market value of the child in terms of compensation, say just for discussion, is around $2,000 a month. That's the market value of the child. In short, the compensation. But the parents notice that the lifestyle of the child is way beyond his or her pay. From a parent's perspective, how do you think can we reconcile this problem? It appears that the child is living beyond his or her means.
Well, you're raising two issues. I mean, if they're living beyond their means, that's their kid's problem, I guess, to solve. If the parents are trying to give them more money,
that's the problem.
So they can live better. The textbook says, which I don't subscribe. I think it's really culturally dependent, but the textbook would say you should get paid a fair wage for your market value.
True.
But I have a client. It's a great example, Enrique. Two brothers, they're second generation. The one guy really makes it happen and has had a very successful track record. The other brother is supportive. Okay, whatever his brother wants to do, he said that sounds good, and so The one guy clearly is the president of making the value increase. They have own 50-50 stock. They have exactly the same pay, same bonus, and they eat lunch together every day as best friends. Now, am I going to go and say, you guys are doing it all wrong? The president should make more than you. And no, I'm not going to say that. I mean, it's working just fine. So I think you have to look at the culture. I mean, there's some smart ways that, if it's creating problems with paying this child more than we should, and they got to figure out a way to make that not be a problem in the company. But I think at the end of the day, there's some family culture things that if you observe those and it doesn't create family dynamic problems, then.
And I guess it is. It's creating, probably the parents tend to support or give more because of the lifestyle needs of the child. And that's going to create more problems for the other children, right? For the other siblings.
It could, but suppose one of your children wants to be an art teacher in school. Is it wrong that they own part of the company stock and get a dividend so they can live a nicer life because they're fulfilling their passion, they're doing what they want to do, they're productive, they're working hard, they're getting great pleasure?
That's totally acceptable. The only unacceptable part is if that art teacher works in the business and goes to work only half a day and pursues his passion and still gets the pay of a full day's work.
Yeah, no, I think those are very difficult questions to,
Yeah.
I think those are all kind of negotiated deals that you kind of work through, and you could have a special needs child that's not capable, but you want to take care of them.
Yes.
There's all kinds of nuances.
Yeah.
I think negotiation and transparency is the key here.
Yeah.
To work it through and be certain that people understand it's not favoritism. It's.
And there should be agreements. There should be, as I've said, and you've said many times, alignment. So all of this can be discussed by means of a family charter, an agreement, anything, but it has to be put in writing. Otherwise, there's going to be more surprises, moving forward. There's a good question here, George. It says here, thank you, George. You talk about wealth preservation and would like to ask about this. The growth of the company is good, but the realization that as the family gets bigger, growth of business must be proportionate. We operate in a very competitive environment. Many years ago, the family business was started to simply feed the family, very Asian. For this reason, growth was measured versus previous year instead of versus the market. I worry that if we don't measure ourselves versus market, we could be losing the game and eventually die. Is this worry valid? And if it is, how do we educate the importance of measuring ourselves versus the market?
So they're losing market share. Is that the bottom line here?
Most likely, that's keeping him worried at night.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if you want to be a successful business, and family business or non-family business, you have to adopt the culture of growth. Growth is defined as success in my mind, and if you don't have growth, you're either growing or you're dying. And if you don't have growth, you're not going to have good people stick around to be part of the business enterprise, and you're going to eventually get replaced because you're not coming up with new products and new value propositions and so on. That's not quite the exact question he's asking. I think he's asking, if I'm losing market share, is that a problem? And without knowing anything more, I'd say, yeah, I think it's something to be concerned about. Why are you losing market share? You should be, maintaining your market share or growing market share. When our business got tough during my tenure, I asked our people, what's our market share? Well, it's 15%. Well, what do we care about what's going on with the industry? Go take market share, beat our competition. And so I think, being focused on market share and keeping up and with innovation and new products, new services, better value propositions, and so on and so forth, is an important part of running a business today. You can't be on your heels anymore.
Good answer.
And if you're not growing, you're not creating any shareholder value, right? If you're making $10 million a year every year, other than accumulating some cash, you're not raising the value of the company. Because companies are valued at a multiple of earnings. If your earnings are flat, you're not really creating value.
Good point. There's another question, George, from a good friend. When and how do you tell a founder it's time to step down? That's the first question. Second question, how do you tell a family member that he or she is not qualified to succeed?
Who's asking these questions? You tell the founder it's time for him to go when he's walking out the door and feet first in his. That's it. I mean, I think telling someone to go is there's more room between that and doing nothing, and that is getting more responsibilities over time. I had a call today actually with a client, and we're talking about is moving the transition from one generation to the next generation and shifting responsibilities in over time. And then my comment was, and I talked to the next generation, said, we're on the right roadmap now, you guys. You should be happy. Now, I don't know whether it's going to be 2 years or 10 years. It's, the definition of when that's going to happen is a function of a variety of things. When the prior generation wants to retire, there's a health problem, or if they get bored, there's a variety of situations that could figure the time, but you're on the roadmap to do that. And I think that's probably the most important thing is as you're getting more and more responsibilities, more and more authority, it's pretty tough to push somebody out unless they have dementia or some type of a health problem. That I think it's tough. And at the end of the day, it was their business that if they're giving it to you, it's the fight ought to be about trying to get more responsibility and getting some independence on maybe running something the way you want to run it and those kinds of things as opposed to pushing the person out the door. What was the second?
How do you tell a family member that he or she is not qualified to succeed? This is on the other side.
Okay, well, I think that's where the board of directors comes in, and particularly your outside directors. I think it was really critical in just about all instances to have an outside board with your family members. And there's no real loss of power, ladies and gentlemen, with an outside board, because you still own the company. You can change the board
anytime.
Yeah. The normal fears of that, it's just going to hold you accountable, and you get an outside perspective. And these tough family issues, relationship issues, get dealt with in a professional, independent manner, objective manner. And I think that will really help you as opposed to the inherent biases that all of us have with our family members.
True. I think I'll dovetail on what you just said. So, how do you tell a family member that he or she is not qualified to succeed? Well, if this is after the fact, then we put in the metrics. If they do not perform year on year, that's a sign that that is not capable. If there were metrics before he assumed the role, well and good. It's easy to simply enforce it. Now, the other difficult part is the founder. What I do, George, and I'll probably cite you, and I thank you for this. I go through the 9-step succession planning. When a founder tells me, I'm going to retire soon, I said, come on, don't give me the BS. Tell me when. Unequivocally, because your children are confused. You say one thing, you say, I'm tired, I want to retire next year. Come on. No more BS. You're tired? That's a given. 40 years, you've done your part. Let me know when do you want to say it's time. 5 years? If you say 5 years, let's all talk about the 5-year game plan. So we shorten the 9-step succession plan, starting with the first step all the way to the 9 steps until day 1 comes in. So when he says 3 years, then we work out an initiative, a program. But these must all be agreed by the family, because founders typically would always lie to me. They say they want to retire, they're tired, and they put a date, and it's all verbal. Then they change their mind because there's another opportunity that's bigger than the current one. So they jump into it again. Then they ask me the question, what if I retire? I'll die fast. I said, let's set up a new business. Or we can give you another role to play. You'd be the head of business development. So you can do deal making on the side, but less on the day-to-day stuff. So founders need to understand that there's life. There's the grass is greener on the other side, because we can help them, we can handhold them, but they have to be truthful and categorical when they say it's going to be 5 years, so that the children will not play tango, right? And the children will be excited to support the future transition of the founder to the next generation.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, what I usually say is you have to retire to something. You have to have purpose. Now, your purpose might be playing golf every day. That's fine if that's what you want to do. But finding a role for no one's gonna want to retire to nothing. And so part of the trick for the next generation is to be certain that the parent has a purpose in what they're going to do. And it could be within the company, like you said, business development, or it could be, hey, these 3 customers or these 6 customers are your old buddies. Your job is to take them, play golf with them, 12 times a year, whatever, and there's ambassadorial roles, there's community roles, there's roles that'll keep them from disrupting the management of the business, if it's the right situation. So I think you nailed that one just fine.
Yeah. So, George, there's so many questions here. I know in the interest of time, we probably have to start wrapping this up. But I guess most of the questions says, what if no one wants to take over the business? And
let's deal with that one. That's a good question too.
Yes.
If no one wants to take over the business, and that's just fine, then the first question is the business a good business, good asset that you want to keep, which hopefully it would be. And then there's nothing wrong with having outside management, an outside CEO and management team. You get your family on the board with some professional directors, and you run the business, because owning your own business is still the best financial, asset you're gonna, I think, pretty much have in these days. And so, we did that for a year. Unfortunately, we picked the wrong guy to run the business when I turned it down. And so then I came back and joined our family business. But there's another common thing is you have the kid's not ready, so you have interim president or CEO to kind of carry the business for 4 or 5 years while another person gets developed. So you don't have to have a family member at the helm of the business. Certainly nice, but you want to have a top-notch person, whether it's family or not family.
Most deserving, most qualified, family member or not, but the objective is really to pursue growth.
Yes, you got to grow. I mean, I say that there are guys out there with lifestyle businesses, I call them, where they make X dollars a year. They're happy with that. It's not growing. They live a nice life, but they're not going to have a good management team. They're not going to have a value creation, and it's not going to probably survive much of a business for the next generation. Yeah.
So thank you, George. So there maybe last 2 questions. There's also another question here. What if the visionary, the founder, is not supportive, and this is too many here in Asia, of any governance initiative, because first he feels that he's going to live forever, and second, he also feels that he's the only one that knows how to run the business, and third, he's just stubborn and just plain hard-headed. What do you think should the other family members who are worried that if he dies or he becomes incapacitated, and we say with loans everywhere, what should they do if the founder is not supportive of the initiative to pursue governance?
Well, I think part of it is trying to get underneath his objections, and starting with an advisory board that has no power, just there to give you, ask questions and challenge and provide thought, advice. If he has a good friend, his peer, like a lawyer or somebody, a good buddy that you know, or he has an, or you know, another company that has an outside board, then his peer might convince him of the value of it, is one option. The other option is to say that we need some extra advice. We need some advisors on our board, because if you're not around, we need more help than what we have right now. And so we need to start, building a team that can help guide the company. Because eventually, going to be around. So it's not easy, but
I totally empathize with the question. I agree with what you just answered, George. I actually did it once. For a founder who's stubborn and just plain and simple, unreasonable. One day I asked one of his best friends, his schoolmate, who was a former CEO. I said, "Hey, the family wants to invest on your golf game, but this is the deal. You need to be with your classmate, and you need to start advising it." And it started from there. Then the founder started to bring him in the business, because he was a former CEO, as an independent member of the board.
Yeah.
And when the classmate entered the picture, he asked me to be the governance advisor. So it was a conspiracy to perpetuate his legacy. And when he passed away, it was kind of seamless. The other thing I would advise, the question here is, if the founder is stubborn, doesn't want to pursue governance, let him be. But the family must do it without him to prepare for his exit.
Yeah,
right?
You can always have your kind of a side advisory board that helps the next generation.
Yeah, I did it a handful of times as well. The family were desirous to pursue governance. The founder refuses to meet me. So I told the family, well, it's either you wait for him to die, or you do it on your own, separately, including the wife. And we did it.
I think it's good counsel.
We did it. So again, it's not the end of the world just because the founder refuses. You guys are of age. Why don't you initiate it yourselves? We also did one where the siblings agreed amongst themselves while their parents were squabbling. They did it, and when one passed away, it was a wonderful transition. So same also here with the question: what if another sibling is unreliable, unresponsive to effecting change, and the founder is no longer around? Again, proper metrics, enforcing the rules, pre-agreed, signed, and sealed, and it must be enforced. Like what you said, George, even if it will hurt them, but the business will continue, eventually you can patch up. As opposed to, ignoring the signs, and the bubble is there, and the business will suffer, everybody loses. So I guess there are too many questions. So, the organizer will probably collect all of this and send it to us. But any parting shot, George, before we close?
Well, I think it was a good dialogue. Perhaps we should have another one, because there's a lot of issues to talk about. It sounds like the group's a good group of family businesses. It's keep the faith, I guess. There's no reason, like I open up with, that the family business can't survive for multiple generations, but there's a lot of issues that need to get dealt with, of which several we talked about. And there's a lot of opportunities to make things better, like some of this wealth evaporation trap and so on. It's all in the book, a lot of stuff there too. So if you have any specific questions, you can feel free to email me and I'll try to respond. Wish all of you the best. I'm a big fan of family businesses. I think it's the way to go. And I almost didn't join ours, but I'm glad I did. And I wish you all well.
Thank you, George. I'll probably just reinforce it with this one last slide here. And it says a lot of things. Family business succession needs to be addressed at launch, not retirement. Yeah. This is the founder who passed away. He's the owner of Eva Air. in Taiwan. When he passed away, his family, the conflict was reignited after he passed away. His kids in the first wife fought with the second wife family. And it was never the same. They were the biggest family in Taiwan. So I think the advice here is simple and fundamental. If you're not into this transition yet, do it now. There's a Chinese saying, when is the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? When is the next best time? Now. If as advisors, we should have done it the day before yesterday. So the key here, folks, is really do it. Like what George said, it's a painstaking process. It's a journey. It's not an event. There's a lot of fluidity going on. It's a moving target. But if you are serious, committed, and fully moving towards stewardship as opposed to ownership, and you're after perpetuating your legacy, there are so many things you can do. But never, never, never procrastinate. I think that's the real advice. So, George, thank you so much for this wonderful time. My apologies, we've extended. There were many questions. We couldn't accommodate most of them, but thank you for those intelligent answers. You've done a great job with your book again. Your family, your business, your legacy. They're available at Amazon. They're available at Kindle. If you have questions that you want to ask George, please send it to us. We will definitely gladly send it to George. So I know we're running out of time, but again, George, thank you so much. We continue to collaborate and help many families all over the world. So again, our deepest gratitude for gracing this event, George.
Thank you, Enrique. I enjoyed it very much and appreciate the exposure to the Asian community. So I wish you all well, and we'll hopefully do it again.
Yep. Hopefully in person when I fly to North America. Thank you again. So, Pat, take it away, Pat.
Thank you so much, Prof. Eric and Mr. George Isaac. That was really a wonderful insight from both of you. And I am really grateful that I was able to hear those insights from you. And I am sure our participants would like to ask a lot of questions, but unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for now. But we are looking forward to see you all again on our next event. So to officially end Creating Family Business Transition Plan, we would like to thank Mr. George Isaac and Professor Eric Soriano for sharing the time and sharing the best practices and valuable insights to our participants in continuing the legacy for future generations. Of course, we would like to extend our appreciation to ICANN Executive Asia, for without them, this webinar would not be possible. And last but not the least, we want to thank our viewers who really responded to our invitation. And we hope you've gained a lot of learnings to lead your businesses to success even at this extraordinary times. Again, my name is Patricia, and please enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Patricia. Good work, guys. Good work, Jason, Patricia, and
Thank you,
Ella.
Paul. Thank you, Mr. George.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.